Hello and welcome to Firstpost Spotlight, where we bring you stories that matter to you from all across the world. From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, we shed light on issues that shape our world. I'm Alison LaGrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. Let's begin with the top headlines. Stock markets plunge worldwide as China announces retaliatory 34% tariffs on the US goods in response to the tariffs announced by US President Trump. South Korea's Constitutional Court upholds the parliament's impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol over his controversial martial law declaration in December. Prime Minister Narendra Modi meets with Nepalese counterpart KP Sharma Ali in Bangkok, days after the two countries signed agreements for community development projects in Nepal. Israel expands ground offensive in Gaza City as rescuers claim at least 30 people killed across the territory since dawn. And Libyan authorities suspend 10 international humanitarian groups after accusing them of planning to settle migrants from other parts of Africa in the country. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest from India, where a senior minister in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has stirred a storm of introspection over the country's startup ecosystem. At an event in New Delhi, the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal compared Indian startups with the ones in neighbouring China. Now, the minister said that Indian startups are making food delivery apps to turn unemployed youth into cheap labour. On the contrary, the Chinese startups are developing electric vehicle and battery technology to dominate these sectors.
What are India's startups doing today? We are focused on food delivery apps, turning unemployed youth into cheap labor so the rich can get their meals without moving out of their house. And against that, what does the Chinese startup do? Work on developing electric mobility, battery technologies, and with that they're today dominating the electric mobility ecosystem. We are very proud of what India has done. But are we the best in the world as yet? Not yet. Should we aspire to be? Or are we going to be happy being delivery boys and girls?
The minister showed a detailed comparison between Indian and Chinese startups to point out that Indian startups are focused on areas such as fancy ice cream and cookies, instant grocery delivery, betting and fantasy sports apps, and quote-unquote influencer economy. Meanwhile, in neighbouring China, the startups are focused on fast-emerging technologies such as semiconductors and AI, robotics and automation, global logistics and trade, and deep tech. Now, Minister Piyush Goyal's remarks have ignited diverse reactions within the Indian startup ecosystem. Indian ride-hailing app Ola's founder Bhavish Agarwal agreed with the minister and said that it's time to build the future, not the past. Meanwhile, the founder of the instant grocery delivery platform Zepto said that it's easy to criticize Indian consumer internet startups, especially when compared to the US and China. The 22-year-old said that the Indian startup ecosystem, the government and investors must support the local entrepreneurs instead of pulling them down. Minister Piyush Goyal's remarks have touched a nerve, while triggering debate both on and off social media on the direction that the Indian startups are taking at present. India, as of December 2024, has over 157,000 functional startups. It's up from just 502 in 2016, making it the third biggest startup ecosystem in the world. But as emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and electric mobility take over the global entrepreneurial landscape, the startup ecosystem of the world's most populous nation is also feeling the need to step in the same direction. Now, speaking at an artificial intelligence summit in Paris in February, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had informed that India is building its own large language model, or LLM, which is key to building advanced AI chatbots such as the US-based ChatGPT or China's DeepSeek.
India is building its own large language model considering our diversity. We also have a unique public-private partnership model for pooling resources like compute power. It is made available to our startups and researchers at an affordable cost.
With Minister Goyal's remarks and Prime Minister Modi's emphasis on an indigenous large language model, India's role in emerging technologies like AI and electric mobility will be closely watched in the immediate future. But as the world moves further in the technology age, can India shift from consumer-driven startups to tech innovation? For more on this, we have with us Mr. Madan Padaki. Thank you for being with us. He is an entrepreneur joining us live from New Delhi. Let's jump right in.
Hi.
Now, Minister Goyal pointed out that... Hi, thanks for being with us. Now, Minister Goyal pointed out that while China is making significant strides in sectors like EVs and AI, India's startup ecosystems still look heavily skewed toward food delivery and similar services. What structural or policy changes would be needed to shift Indian startups toward deep tech and to core innovation?
Sure. Thanks you for having me on the show. In fact, I am at the Startup Mahakumbh event in Delhi where Minister Goyal made these comments yesterday, and I was in the audience. From my reading, of course, he said it from the perspective of having Indian startups push the boundaries and push the envelopes much further than what we're doing today. So I see where he is coming from and see the reason why he's taking that call. I also believe that it's not an either or choice for the size of India's country and population. We need to do both. There has to be conveniences, access, choice, and convenience that has to be brought up for citizens, as well as we need to invest much more in deep tech, AI startups, and build for the future. From a structural standpoint, work is underway, but connecting our academic institutions with innovation that is happening in the industrial marketplaces, enabling students to play around with these technologies, getting exposed to these emerging technologies of the future, and tinkering around with them is the key. As an example, we had 10 startup teams from various colleges across the country pitching yesterday, and you'll be amazed at the kind of ideas in deep tech and AI that these students were thinking about. So I think we are on the right track, but we need to accelerate the whole effort, much beyond what we are doing today.
Right, Madan. So definitely a matter of context and some encouraging news there. Do you think that the comparison with China's innovation-driven approach is fair, given the differences, as you touched on there, in government support, infrastructure, and, of course, market dynamics? And what lessons, if any, can Indian startups draw from China's model?
Yeah. I mean, of course, these are two different systems, political, the way the system works. India and China are two different models. But having said that, there are several things to learn from the approach. There's a long-term patient capital approach that needs to be taken, especially if we want to foster deep tech innovations. We have to bring some kind of a mission mode approach to solving for this, where we have to bring all the relevant ecosystem actors together. That's slowly beginning to happen here. We also need to bring the industry to the table in a big way and connect them to trends and innovation that's happening in the research labs, and of course at a larger level. I think India needs to spend a lot more of our GDP on R&D. We are still pretty low compared to China. So I think these are the lessons we can learn from from the models that are prevalent there.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us on First Post.
Thank you so much.
Now, for our next story, we look at a case of logistical nightmare at an airport. Now, this ordeal involves a Virgin Atlantic flight. It was supposed to arrive in India's Mumbai after taking off from London, but a medical emergency and technical issue forced it to make an unscheduled landing. The VS 358 flight was forced to divert to Diyarbakir Airport in Turkey. In the plane were roughly 260 passengers, including babies and a pregnant woman, among others. The Diyarbakir Airport, where this unfolded, is a remote military base with limited supplies in Turkey. Now, what should have been a quick stop turned into chaos and stretched on for over 40 hours. It started when a passenger suffered a panic attack mid-flight. The crew decided to divert the Diyarbakir military airport to get help. Now, upon landing, the aircraft suffered a technical failure, and as time passed, people started losing patience. Virgin Atlantic issued a statement to apologize. The airline said that the safety and security of customers were their first priority, and they are working as fast as possible to fix the issue. Now, an unscheduled flight landing isn't surprising. Neither is it uncommon for an aircraft to encounter technical issues. But for both of these to happen simultaneously is unexpected. Now, the biggest issue here was that the flyers were taken to a military airport. It was not a regular passenger terminal. Food was limited, toilets weren't enough for the crowd, and phones also started running out of battery. And passengers shared their horrifying experiences. People said they couldn't communicate with authorities because they didn't speak English, and some complained that they weren't getting clear updates from Virgin Atlantic. With no clarity on departure, frustration grew. Now, the issue gained momentum and Indian embassy got involved. They said that they are getting temporary visas arranged. Virgin Atlantic said that its flight will be flown to Mumbai today, and this was confirmed by the Indian embassy on X. Now, after hours of exhaustion and frustration, the passengers of the Virgin Atlantic flight will finally be back to their destination, or at least they hope to be soon. It was a harrowing experience that no traveler would want to face. Sometimes the toughest part of the journey isn't the distance, but the weight that comes with it. And moving on, Turkey has stepped up its attack against Israel over the Netanyahu government's bombing campaign in Syria. Ankara says that Israel has become the greatest threat to regional security. Calling Israel a strategic destabilizer that is feeding terrorism, Turkey said that Israel must withdraw from occupied territories in Syria and end its strikes. Ankara's charge comes after Israel accused it of trying to turn Syria into a Turkish protectorate. Now, the Israel foreign minister also raised concerns about Turkish influence in New Syria, accusing Ankara of playing a negative role there in Lebanon and other regions.
They are doing their utmost to have Syria as a Turkish protectorate. It's clear that this is their intention. We don't think that it was good when Syria was in an Iranian proxy, kind of Iranian proxy, and we don't think that Syria should be a Turkish protectorate. We indeed are worried by Turkish. By the way, it's not only in Syria. They play a negative role in Syria. They play a negative role in Lebanon. They play a negative role in. They have aspiration all over the region and in other regions of the world.
Israel has been stepping up airstrikes on Syria in what it says are a warning to the new Islamist leaders in Damascus. The latest strikes by the Israeli military were some of the most intense attacks in Syria since Bashar al-Assad's regime was toppled in December last year. Now, earlier this week, Israel struck 5 separate areas in Syria in a window of 30 minutes. These strikes resulted in near-complete destruction of the Hama airbase and left dozens of civilians and Syrian soldiers injured. Reports say a dozen Israeli strikes demolished runways, arms depots and hangars at the military airport in Hama. Israel said it had also attacked Syrian air bases in the Homs province, in addition to those in Damascus area, where authorities said a scientific research facility was hit. The Israeli army said its forces operating in southwest Syria's Tazil area killed several militants who opened fire on them. Now, Syrian state media said that Israel's shelling had killed 9 people during what it described as the deepest incursion yet by Israeli troops in the area.
Syrian regime, we say very clearly, any attempt by your forces or terrorist groups to entrench themselves will not be allowed. Israel will act decisively, and we mean it. Just yesterday, the IDF struck military targets at the Hama and T4 bases, as well as key infrastructure in the Damascus region. Last night, IDF forces operated in southern Syria to dismantle terrorist infrastructure and seize weapons. When terrorists opened fire on our troops, they were swiftly eliminated. Israel will not allow threats to build up on our borders. We will act whenever and wherever necessary to ensure our security.
Israel has seized parts of southwestern Syria and created a buffer zone there since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, saying it is to secure Israel's safety from armed groups. Now, Israel's defense minister said that the airstrikes were a clear message and a warning for the future that his forces would not allow Israel's security to be harmed. During the 24-year rule of Bashar al-Assad, Israel bombed Syria frequently, targeting the foothold established by his ally Iran during the civil war. Now, Israel's latest strikes on Syria have put renewed focus on its concerns about interim Syrian President Ahmed al-Ajani and the new Islamist rulers. Now, Israel views the new Syrian rulers as a rising threat at its border. Syria called these strikes an unjustified escalation and called on the international community to build pressure on Israel to end its aggression. Now, critics say that Israel's military operations are only adding to the existing tensions in Syria and preventing long-term stability and reconstruction for the war-torn country. With Turkey on its side, can the new Islamist leaders of Syria rebuild the country? More importantly, can the Ankara-Damascus front block or retaliate to Israeli aggression? For our final story, we take you inside the insular world of Chinese social media, where fiction is often framed as fact in the pursuance of Chinese Communist Party's geopolitical goals. Now, in the latest, false information regarding former Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte reached alarming proportions in China. The firebrand Filipino populist who surrendered to the International Criminal Court last month for alleged crimes against humanity is subject to various outlandish claims. Fabricated accounts on Chinese internet describe his life to be hanging in the balance. Some Chinese social media posts even falsely suggested that the former President Duterte had fallen into a coma while in detention at The Hague. Now, some even accused the International Criminal Court of subjecting Duterte with quote-unquote medical violence by giving him inferior drugs for his age-related ailments. The disinformation does not stop here. Several falsified posts on Chinese social media framed a state of civil war in the Philippines after Duterte's arrest. False narratives to suggest defection of Filipino military commanders also surfaced. The false claims of dissent within the Filipino military gained particular traction in China, as Chinese users claimed further edge over Manila in an event of a potential conflict with the country amid a string of territorial disputes. Now, the obvious question which arises is that in a Communist Party-run China, where the flow of information is tightly controlled and social media exchanges are closely watched, why disinformation regarding Duterte's arrest is being promoted on social media? Now, that's because in the Xi Jinping-led nation, Duterte is viewed as a long-time China-leaning figure and a critic of US military influence in the region. Now, the two countries also shared a period of friendlier ties during Duterte's presidency between 2016 and 2022. But Manila's pivot toward Washington became more prominent as President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. came to power in 2022. China views the Duterte successor as a chief proponent of utilizing Manila-Washington strategic alliance to counter its expansionist claims. Now that's why, on Chinese social media, the misinformation on the arrest of a supposed pro-China leader is being propagated unchecked. At the same time, President Marcos Jr.'s cooperation with the ICC for Duterte's arrest is seen as a step taken by the current Filipino president to politically eliminate a pro-China rival. The spread of false information surrounding Duterte's arrest reflects China's efforts to influence public perception and geopolitics. While its much-touted Great Firewall may shield the Chinese people from the world outside, this exact technological insulation also continues to proliferate delusion, not the truth. And that's all we have on the show for you today. We will see you again at the same time on Monday. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to Firstpost.
From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, shedding light on the world's top headlines, detailed analysis on the stories that matter the most to you. Catch it all on Spotlight at 6 p.m. India time and 12:30 GMT. Only